Good morning. Welcome to all of you here in the sanctuary with us and to those of you who are online with us. My name is Sandra Murphy. I prefer the pronouns she, her, hers. And I want to welcome to the Unitarian Universalist congregation of Flint. We are an inclusive, progressive, and LGBTQINA+ affirming church, and we are happy to have you with us. If you'd like more information about Unitarian Universalism or our congregation, please feel free to contact one of our ministers or our office. That contact information can be found at uuflint.org. The announcements I'm about to share with you can also be found in our weekly e-update. Visitors may sign up to get this weekly e-newsletter by filling out one of these cards that are in the seat backs and dropping it in the basket as you leave the order of service, as you leave the service, and then you can scan the code on the back of the order of service if you'd like to do that. I want to thank everyone who participated in the crop walk to end world hunger. There they are. We came, we walked, we donated, raising $440. Let's do it again next year. And a big shout out to Chris Monk and Terry Cross, who were the coordinators of this wonderful event. So thank you to all. We have a project that we'll be doing during coffee hour this morning. The Michigan Unitarian Universalist Social Justice Network, MooseGen as we call it, is helping us connect with UU the Vote to provide opportunities to engage incarcerated individuals in the upcoming general election. So what we want to do today is knock out 370 postcards. Let's see, if everybody takes a sheet, that's 30. Yep, we can get this done today. Labels and stamps are what go on the postcards. I'll be at a table during the coffee hour to hand these out, and for everybody who does it, they get a special Halloween treat. Motivated by food, I know that. If you had to answer 2 questions, what do I love about Unitarian Universalism and what don't I love about it, what would you say? Our service on October 23rd is called To Question is Divine, and you can help us make that service a success by answering those 2 questions on paper and putting your response in the box out in the narthex. You can even do it anonymously if you like. You can also email your responses to Jerry. We will hear and answer questions and or concerns about Unitarian Universalism at our service on October 23rd. Join us to recognize Domestic Violence Awareness Month and lift up those affected by intimate partner violence. The gathering is at 6 p.m. October 18th at the YWCA building, which is in downtown Flint. There will be refreshments, a short program, and an opportunity to tour the Women's Empowerment Center, which is a new endeavor by the YWCA. There will be Memorial Garden and Grounds Work Party this Saturday, October 15th from 9 to noon. Contact John Helsum with questions. We will have a short but very important congregational meeting following the October 23rd service. We want to make a final decision about the building of a ramp to the chancel. The board will be presenting clearly defined options for us to vote on through the e-update, so watch for that this coming week. Sue Owen Kinsey would appreciate anyone who has questions to get to her ahead of time so that she can help move the meeting along in an efficient manner. I think you know what that means. Once a month, we make a proclamation reminding us of the indigenous inhabitants of this land. Our congregation acknowledges we stand on the traditional lands of the Council of Three Fires and the Anishinaabe peoples, who were the indigenous inhabitants of Michigan. Our congregation supports indigenous-led organizations and grassroots change movements, and we encourage others to do as well. We also support indigenous-led campaigns in their quest to have carefully chosen land returned to them. Our chalice lighting. We light this chalice in honor of the sacred sites across the country that ground Native American spirituality and religions. May their fires continue to burn bright as they pass their identities, traditions, and histories on from generation to generation. And now if you'll join me in saying our covenant, recognizing the richness of diversity, the beauty and wonder of shared worship, and the transforming power of love and service, we gather as a sacred, intentional community to freely seek knowledge and truth, to celebrate the fullness of life, and by our actions to increase goodness and justice. Today is the second Sunday of the month, which means we take special offering for one of the 12 nonprofit organizations making our community a better place. Today's recipient is Motherly Intercession. The mission of Motherly Intercession is to empower children and foster a stronger community by preventing the cycle of intergenerational incarceration. The vision of Motherly Intercession is for children of incarcerated parents to realize that their parents' destiny does not have to be their destiny. You can support Motherly Intercession by writing a check to UUCF with Motherly Intercession on the memo line and placing it in the offering basket on the table at the back of the church. Or you can go to our website, click the Donate Now button, and you'll find the place to donate for a second Sunday offering. All gifts are gratefully accepted.
Good morning. Good morning. Our opening words are from Ann Barker on reconciliation for Native people. We gather for a hunger on reconciliation. What is done cannot be undone. What is done next must be done with care. We gather because we're hopeful. There are wounds that we must heal together. This is not a time for quick solutions. This is a slow precision. We're not new at this endeavor, but we are new at listening, new at hearing, new at taking enough time to honestly receive one another's stories. What is done cannot be undone. What is done next must now be done with care. We gather because we're hopeful, because we have visions and dreams of a brighter future.
Please stand if willing or able. Hey, come together at the end of another week, some worn down by struggles of health, of home, or work. May we be a community that makes space for the sharing of joys and sorrows, angers and hopes with grace and forbearance. In our nation's life, we pause this holiday weekend to remember the Native American lost from the European colonization. Teach us to remember our history. Though we cannot make amends for everything that has come before, may we learn from those ways. May we learn never to repeat them in our lives today. In our struggles, may we learn compassion. And in our power, may we learn temperance. As a community of faith, may we be a safe harbor in a world that is often harsh towards difference. May we use our presence as a healing force for justice and equity. As we sit in silence today, let us reflect on the many gifts we have to offer to bring grace and peace to our troubled world. Let us pledge ourselves to greater service in the week ahead. During our musical meditation, you'll be invited to come forward or go to the back of the sanctuary to light a candle of joy or concern. You can also write your joys or concerns in the books on the back table, and we'll make sure they get into our weekly e-update. But first, let's enjoy the silence. reading this morning comes from Peggy Clark, the senior minister at the UU Community Church of New York City. When this country was founded, the aspiration was high. The men who imagined it dreamed big, casting a vision of a world where all men were created equal, transcending culture and the expectations of the day, where life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness would be allowed and enjoyed without infringement. It was a radical and new vision, born of the Enlightenment, inspired by scientific discovery. It was an intoxicating vision, as bold as the Protestant Reformation that swept all of Europe. And they had the hubris to believe they could make it happen. They staked their claim in the Declaration of Independence and institutionalized it in the Constitution. They elected their first president, and when he stepped down, relinquishing power to return to the role of citizen, those founders believed they had lived to see their vision realized. A new president ran for office, and the republic was up and running. It was done. A new world order. Those men weren't distracted by the genocide they inspired or the enslavement of other people they required for this nation to be born. They declared equality while swimming in a sea of inequality. When they declared all men were created equal, they meant white Protestant men. They didn't mean women. They weren't including black people who'd been enslaved or those who were free. They didn't include Catholics, Jews, Indigenous people, or even people who didn't own land. They were so proud of their inclusivity, so inspired by their own cutting-edge philosophy, that they had no idea how narrow it was, how constrictive, how small a vision. The men who wrote those words were calling into being a more perfect union. They were establishing justice, ensuring domestic tranquility, securing the blessings of liberty. They believed that they and the men of their generation would will this nation into being. They would establish the structures required for such a grand vision, and they would test it, and then it would be done. They didn't realize it would require many more people, many different verses. They didn't know how many generations would have to be part of the creation of that dream. They didn't know how long it would take before the nation they imagined would be made manifest. The soul of America has yet to be born.
When I was about 5 years old or so, my grandparents took me on a vacation to Arizona to visit my great aunt. And on the way, we stopped in New Mexico at a Pueblo reservation. Now, I imagine that I thought the ancient adobe structures were neat, but I seem to remember I was much more fascinated with getting a pair of moccasins at the gift shop to go with the Halloween costume that my mom was sewing. A couple of years before that, unbeknownst to me, and I'm sure my grandparents, a major event had occurred on that land for those people. Nixon had signed one of the most significant bills to date, giving land back to the Taos Pueblo, including exclusive use of more than 1,600 acres surrounding Blue Lake. It was a precedent-setting bill for all tribes, and it helped some other very important bills pass. Tribes everywhere across the country thought it might be the beginning of a new understanding with the U.S. government. But illegal grabs of tribal lands continued nonetheless. Even today, when Native tribes legally have the power of free and prior consent, the government hands over documents after the damage has already been done. Then, the tribe has no alternative but to react, usually in the form of a lawsuit. Those can drag on for decades, which is what happened in the case of Blue Lake. In the case of Blue Lake, as early as 1906, the U.S. government had control of it. They filed the first lawsuit in 1951. But after 19 years, the Pueblo won. Now their most sacred shrine is open to no one but people of the Pueblo tribe. In fact, even its location is a secret. UU minister Jan Carlson Bull from Connecticut was a bit surprised by that at first when she visited the area not long ago. She was talking to the young couple working at the gift shop when they spoke of the nearby sacred site. Explaining to the minister that their people believe that they were created from its waters, she excitedly asked how to get there so that she could experience such holy ground. She was told it is not on maps, and it was off limits to her. She asked why, and the reply was, it is the only way we can protect it. Of course, she thought, because non-native people don't know how to care for such things, and we've never been taught. We feel we own the land. We have taken our cues from loved and respected teachers and preachers and parents and grandparents. Yes, we trust our grandparents to take us places and tell us the real story. But they have not always known the truth either. My grandparents also took my 5-year-old self to a Wild West show in Tucson later during that same vacation. The tourism industry loved my grandparents. The natives screamed and carried tomahawks, but they were cut down by the cowboys in white hats on the main street of that fake Western town. And Grandpa had to get a picture of Lynn with one of the good guys. Well, you know who that was. Now, you can't blame my grandparents. They meant well. It was a different time. Best of all for me, that Wild West gift shop sold little wooden tomahawks and feathered headbands with real white feathers sticking out of them. My Halloween costume was complete. As a kid, I didn't know that I shouldn't dress up like an Indian. Nor did I know that's not what I should call them. And it wasn't until this past week that I learned the complete history of Blue Lake. It's just been a year since I was aware that there are many lands and waters Indigenous people have that are threatened. Important, essential, and sacred to the tribes that have inhabited these areas for over 20,000 years. Imagine if you had to fight for a law to be passed so that you could get access to a space that is integral to your own religion. And even then, people violate those laws. Now, scientific research shows that nature in general has long been linked to transformational, religious, and even mystical experiences. But for Native people, their spirituality is not only connected to nature, but connected to very specific natural areas, specific to their tribes. It is where their creation narrative arose. And it's where they grow certain herbs for ceremonies and medicines, and how the landscape gave rise to their entire culture. Yet so many are dangerously close to being lost. But most of us are just tourists, passing through their lands, purchasing moccasins for our grandchildren, and maybe some other trinkets, because we think that's what we're supposed to do to support their economy. But instead, we could be asking, how can we help protect their way of life? How can we help them pass their customs and language and ceremonies for generations to come on the ancestral land that is now threatened? Places like the sacred Snake River, which is considered the most endangered river in the United States. 4 dams in southeastern Washington threaten sustainable levels of salmon that are depended upon by the northwestern tribes for survival. The river is a living being to the salmon people. It is injured, they say, and it must be repaired so it may flow free. Or Bears Ears in Utah, which was named a national monument by Obama in 2016. It's held sacred by 5 different tribes, and it's also archaeologically significant because of all the scattered artifacts. Well, unfortunately, it's also full of oil and uranium, making it vulnerable to exploitation. So Trump reduced the national monument by 85% and removed its monument status. Biden restored its national monument status, but all of those 5 tribes still struggle to restore the original 1.35 million acres. There's also the Dakota Access Pipeline that not only endangers sacred lands and water supplies, but it also violates treaties and endangers the climate. You probably know it as Standing Rock. For more than 5 years, protesters have stood with the Standing Rock Sioux tribe to protest the pipeline, which has been operating illegally and threatening the way of life of this tribe and anyone who is living downstream of the Missouri River Reservoir. You'll find the White Earth Indian Reservation in northern Minnesota. A pipeline called Line 3 is being proposed to cut through their hunting and fishing territory and some of the most fertile wild rice stands in the state. Enbridge's construction, yes, that Enbridge, would damage this land, and if there were an oil spill, the tribe's resources and culture would be destroyed. And lastly, I'm sure you are familiar with the Straits of Mackinac and the Bay Mills Native community. The waterway that connects Lake Michigan and Lake Huron is sacred to Bay Mills. It not only provides them with cultural resources, but economic livelihood, food, and obviously water. Although they have access through a treaty, Enbridge's Line 5 has ruptured 33 times and leaked over 1 million gallons of oil. The proposed new tunnel and pipeline has not received proper permits or ecological studies, and it breaks the treaty with the native Bay Mills community. The commonality among all of these sacred sites is that all of these native communities are forced to fight our federal government to hold up treaties to preserve their culture and their religion. And it comes down to two things, in simple terms: greed and sanctity. Now, I get the greed part, wanting to possess something. Some 50 years ago, I couldn't wait to get my hands on a pair of moccasins for a Halloween costume. Today, I know that dressing up like a Native American is one of the most offensive things that we can do. My parents and grandparents didn't know that, nor did they know anything about threatened sacred sites. If they had, maybe they would have saved me the grief I experienced recently. It started on a family vacation about 8 years ago. Our family visited the ancestral sites of the Hopi, the Sinagua tribes, near Sedona, Arizona. Portions of those ancient structures are still standing, and you can make out this amazing art on the cliff walls. And on that vacation, it seemed like it was the only thing that our pre-teen son got excited about on the entire vacation. And so as we were walking back on the winding red dirt path back to the parking lot, I noticed, because I'm always looking down for rocks and plants and other things, I looked down and I noticed shards of red rock, and they were in geometric shapes. And that moccasin-obsessed 5-year-old in me thought, hey, I could stack those up and make a great homemade souvenir cairn, right? So I stooped and scrambled in the red dust looking for just the right ones. And my son saw that I had stopped, and he turned around and he yelled, "Mom, put those down." Well, then I explained what I was doing. He said, "Yeah, drop them. This place is holy." He said, "Leave them alone." And I remember saying that he was being silly or some such thing. And then he turned around and he walked back to me, and he grabbed my arm. And then he hissed into my ear, "I hope the natives haunt you for taking those." He was serious. This was not a joke to him. For the rest of the trip in Arizona, he went on and on about me cursing the family for taking rocks from a sacred burial ground. Now, I insisted that I didn't think anybody had been buried there. It was just where they lived. Plus, I said, I got them from the trail. It wasn't over by where they were living. And yes, I did bring them home in my suitcase on the flight, and I made a cairn out of them, and I still have the cairn. But it's hiding somewhere in the house because Rowan threatened to do something with it. But nothing bad happened, except that now I feel terrible about it because I know he was absolutely right. It was a sacred site, and I had no business taking anything from there. I was trying to possess a part of it instead of just protecting it. So in the last year or so, I've learned a lot. And I know I made an awful mistake. I had a desire to take something from the land, to own it. And isn't that a non-native kind of thing to feel? So just like others want to make money from the land or water because the natural resources are there and they're so rich, and we can be people who just don't understand what it means to be a sacred place. And on the other side, you have Indigenous people and their lawyers and their allies, which now I am one of those, who are trying to preserve and protect those places and the very things that make those places and those Indigenous people who they are. And I think perhaps one of the most difficult tasks is determining how to convince others that those ancient structures and those ancient sites are sacred. And I mean, yes, there are laws that protect them, and they date all the way back to the 1800s, but they're broken all the time. And then there was a string of new laws that were passed the 70s and the 80s and the 90s to further protect those tribal lands, but vague language and a few people simply not valuing the culture gave the government enough latitude to simply ignore such laws. Even calling an area a sacred landscape without a definition for that allowed a burial site to include just a hill and not the rest of the area around it, because that area was full of natural resources and people wanted to mine it. So, in addition, there were other loopholes, like any unique geographic or biologic area, a place like the Grand Canyon, that held interest for multiple groups, such as tribes, tourists, scientists. The government said, well, we can't just hold it for tribes. Everyone has to have access to it. So there is some good news, though. 2 bills have just been introduced to help protect the most vulnerable areas that I just described to you earlier, to clear up some of these issues. And they're both widely supported by tribal leaders. And I recently attended a webinar hosted by the Native Organizers Alliance, which is one of the organizations promoting those bills. And one of the speakers was Woody Lee, and he's a Navajo leader from Bears Ears in Utah, and I showed you a picture of Bears Ears. And Woody Lee is an interesting man, and I was really intrigued by the way he said he tries to describe native sacred spaces to non-native people. He said, these places are our classrooms, our church, our medicine cabinets, even our history books. He says, is this okay for others to do to another's past? The entire panel agreed that in the final analysis, it will come down to non-native people understanding what these ancestral territories mean to Indigenous people. They're not tourist destinations or photo ops for your grandkids. They have deep religious and cultural meaning. And thousands of years of language, medicine, and ceremonies are at risk of being lost. So at the very least, lawmakers will need to work out plans to co-manage public lands, and advocates will need to find ways to show those who have the power that they are serious and rational, have a serious and rational culture, although they believe that everything on earth is alive. And that could be a tough thing. When someone at the webinar asked what was most important for a non-native person to know, all the speakers agreed on the answers, and there were several. And there were obvious things that you all know, but I'm going to repeat them anyway. They were things like be an ally, stand in unity with Indigenous people. Many of us do that. Obviously, we need to help elect people who want to make lasting and transformational change for Indigenous people. And although cliche, they said writing letters and making calls helps. They said sign petitions. The petition for the two bills that I mentioned has 27,000 names. There are also numerous organizations that you can support that are working for Native causes. The Native American Rights Fund, the Oil and Water Don't Mix organization, which is for the Mackinac Straits, and Earth Justice, which does international work. Those are just a few. And then, of course, a no-brainer is just be informed. I didn't even know about Bears Ears and what happened between Obama, Trump, and then Biden. Let's tell Biden to give them those acres back. And if we can just listen to the stories of our Native friends and do it with an open mind and heart. Every time I have talked to these people, I have learned something. And another thing that I learned was I was really happy and surprised to hear that we are invited to go to reservations, and then we can become better advocates for the preservation of language and songs and ceremonies once we've witnessed them. There's a lot to learn. And keep in mind that a lot of us never got the true story, so this is one way we can. The ones that didn't get the true story are the ones that are going to be out celebrating Columbus Day tomorrow. And finally, one of the most touching things I heard during this webinar was something that Woody Lee also said. He said when they have ceremonies and they say prayers, he said it, even on their own reservations on their land, he said it's not just for their people, for their tribes. He said it's for all of humanity. He said we care about everyone. When we save ancestral territory, we save Earth Mother for all of us. Lawmakers, big oil, and Columbus Day celebrants, I think, need to hear that. It's all of us. I found a quote by Native American activist and author Winona LaDuke, you may have heard that name, that I thought was a little discouraging. She said one of the problems she thinks about saving sacred sites is that many non-natives understand sacred in a different way than Indigenous people. She says in the teachings of the church, there's a separation of the land from people. She says we end up with a belief that it doesn't matter what we do here because salvation is someplace else. So it doesn't matter what we do to the earth. She says damming and mining doesn't damage the place of worship for white people like it does for a native tribe. But I'm optimistic that with the concerns about climate crisis and more people caring about the relationship with nature, I think people are moving away from wanting to own the earth and see that we have to have a symbiotic relationship with it. And I think people are becoming more connected. And I think if people can see things like the Indigenous people and perhaps help spread that message that this isn't just land and water, but it's their classrooms, their churches, their medicine cabinets, and their history books, I think there might be hope. But I know that it seems sometimes like there's just too many people that think capitalism is what's sacred, and oil and tourism and development is what's king. And I admit that there's a lot of work to do, but I think there's people out there that are starting to do it, and there's a lot of them. And we just need to move from a mindset of possession to protection. And maybe today's given you a few ideas. I know my research and my conversations with a lot of people have really inspired me. And after everything I learned, I have seriously asked the Hopi ancestors in Sedona to forgive my transgression. And seriously, I hope that I can return those stones back to where they belong. And it just seems important. And so does anything that we can do to help save sacred places for Native people, because ultimately it's not just for them, it is for all of us and for Earth Mother. May it be so.
Shenandoah. She said she would meet me by the fork in the road. Jumpstart my one-eyed Ford. I'm heading for the powwow. Follow the red path that leads to you. Give my love a golden feather. Give my love a heart of stone. When you find your golden feather, it means you'll never lose your way back home. Should I paint my face? Should I pierce my skin? Does this make me a pagan, sweating out my sin? Ate the sacred mushroom and waded in the water, howling like coyotes at the naked moon. Give my love a golden feather. Give my love a heart of stone. When you find a golden feather, it means you'll never lose your way back home. In the autumn night, when there's no wind blowing, I hear the stars falling in the dark. When you find out what's worth keeping, with a breath of kindness, blow the rest away. gave my love a golden feather. I gave my love a heart of stone. When you find your golden feather, it means you'll never lose your way back home.
We know that your financial contributions to this congregation come from hard work and sacrifice. We're so grateful for this and commit together to ensure the funds we gather collectively do a greater good for ourselves and our world than they could alone. May there be an offering to sustain and grow the life and mission of this congregation. May we give in love and in hope. We invite you to join us as we take the collection by placing your offering in the basket at the back of the church when you leave, or by an online gift at uuflint.org. All gifts, all donations are gratefully accepted.
For 24 hours tomorrow, we can celebrate the greatest act of the Renaissance and the act of a single man. Or we can solemnize the death of tens of millions and the extermination of whole peoples. We cannot stand up and say, "This must stop." We cannot tell them to run and never stop running. What was, was. We can, though, choose to remember, to recognize, and never minimize.
And let us extinguish our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.